When Alex corrected his teacher, he was expelled, but the school didn't anticipate who would come to pick him up. The bell had just rung at Jefferson Middle School in Springfield, Illinois. Students rushed into their classrooms, chatting about the latest basketball game or what was for lunch. But for Alex Carter, the day was already planned out in his mind. Alex wasn't like most kids in his 8th grade class. While others spent their weekends playing video games, he was up at dawn, helping his father, Marcus Carter, manage their farm. Their property spanned acres, fields of wheat, barley, and a small herd of goats. It was tough work, but Alex loved it. He knew things most kids his age didn't: how to manage crop cycles, fix irrigation systems, and even predict weather changes by observing the wind. He took pride in his family's heritage. Farming wasn't just their livelihood, it was their legacy. But today, none of that mattered as he took his seat in Mrs. Laura Bennett's 8th grade science class. He already knew what was coming. They were starting a unit on modern agriculture, and Mrs. Bennett, a petite woman in her late 30s, was handing out worksheets. "All right, class," she began, adjusting her glasses. "Today, we're discussing farming methods. Everything you need is in your textbooks. Follow along as we go through traditional and modern techniques." Alex glanced at the worksheet. Immediately he noticed issues: the section on crop rotation, outdated; the part about irrigation, missing crucial details; the claim that small farms were disappearing, completely inaccurate. His family was. In proof of that, Mrs. Bennett continued, walking between the rows of desks. "Farming has changed significantly over the years. Traditional methods are becoming less common. Most small farms are struggling, and large corporations are taking over." Alex raised his hand. "That's not entirely true." Mrs. Bennett turned, her expression tightening. "Excuse me?" "My family runs a farm," Alex said, sitting up straighter. "We use modern techniques, but we're still a small operation. And crop rotation isn't outdated, it's essential for soil health." A few students turned to look at him. Some smirked, others whispered. Mrs. Bennett let out a short laugh. "Alex, I appreciate your input, but I think I'll trust the experts who wrote the textbook." "But the textbook is wrong," Alex insisted. "We use advanced tools, drones, soil sensors, GPS-guided equipment. Small farms aren't just surviving, they're thriving." The room fell silent. Mrs. Bennett set her textbook down and crossed her arms. "Alex, this class follows the curriculum. If you have concerns, we can discuss them after class." Alex clenched his jaw. "But you're teaching us incorrect information." A few kids chuckled under their breath. Mrs. Bennett's face darkened. "That's enough. Take your worksheet and complete the assignment." Alex didn't back down. "So, we're supposed to just copy wrong answers?" The tension in the room grew thicker. Mrs. Bennett's voice turned cold. "You're being disruptive. If you can't respect this class, you can leave." Alex stared at her, his heart pounding. "I'm just telling the truth." That was it. "Office, now!" Mrs. Bennett snapped, pointing at the door. A few gasps echoed through the classroom. Alex's hands tightened into fists as he grabbed his backpack and stood. The stares burned into his back as he walked out, his chest heavy with frustration. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Alex walked down the hallway, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The air was thick with a mix of anger and disbelief. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't loud or disrespectful. He just refused to let someone dismiss his reality. The very thing his family had built with their own hands. When he reached the office, the secretary barely looked up. Mrs. Harper, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, tapped her keyboard. "Mrs. Bennett already called," she said, pointing to a chair near the principal's door. "Have a seat." Alex slumped into the chair, his leg bouncing nervously. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and Principal Daniel Harris A tall man with graying hair and a stern expression gestured for him to step inside. The office smelled like old paper and cleaning supplies. The principal leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Alex," he began, his voice tired. "What's going on?" Alex sat up straight. "I corrected Mrs. Bennet on something. In class," he said. "She said I was being disruptive." Principal Harris sighed. "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Did you argue after she told you to stop?" "I just told her the textbook was wrong," Alex said firmly. "Because it is. My family farms, and we—" Harris held up a hand. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong, but in a classroom setting, you have to respect the teacher's authority." Alex's jaw tightened. "Even if she's wrong?" Principal Harris hesitated. "There's a time and place for discussions like that," he finally said. "Maybe you could have talked to her after class." Alex shook his head. "She wasn't going to listen. She laughed at me." Harris sighed again, heavier this time. "Alex, I have no reason to believe Mrs. Bennet was trying to disrespect you, but she felt you were disrupting the class. That's the issue here." Alex's fingers dug into his jeans. "So I'm supposed to just sit there and let her teach things that aren't true?" Before the principal could respond, the door opened, and Mrs. Bennet stepped inside. Her expression was tense, her arms crossed over her chest. "I see we're still debating this," she muttered. Principal Harris looked between them. "Mrs. Bennet, I'd like to find a way to resolve this without taking disciplinary action. Alex says he wasn't being disrespectful, just correcting misinformation." Mrs. Bennet's face darkened. "This isn't about whether he's right or wrong. It's about following rules. I gave him an instruction, and he ignored it." Alex swallowed his anger. "You didn't answer my question. You just wanted me to shut up." Mrs. Bennet's lip twitched. "Watch your tone, young man." Principal Harris leaned forward, rubbing his chin. "Mrs. Bennet, is this worth suspension?" Alex's heart pounded. Suspension? For what? Mrs. Bennet hesitated, then said, "I think a firm consequence is needed." Harris let out a long breath before nodding. "Alex, I'm going to have to send you home for the rest of the day. We'll discuss further action tomorrow." Alex's stomach dropped. "That's not fair." Principal Harris raised a hand. "It's not about fair, Alex. It's about structure." Alex stood, his chair scraping against the floor, his fists clenched at his sides, but he knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Mrs. Harper called his mother, and within 20 minutes Sarah Carter arrived, her face unreadable as she walked into the office. Alex knew that look. It wasn't anger, it was something worse, disappointment. Harris explained the situation, and by the time they walked out, his mother's silence weighed heavier than words. The car ride home was tense. "You want to explain to me why I had to leave work for this?" she asked finally. Alex stared out the window. "I told the truth." Sarah let out a slow breath. "You could have told the truth after class." Alex shook his head. She wasn't going to listen. His mother didn't argue, but when they pulled into the driveway of their farmhouse, Alex's father was already standing outside, arms crossed. Marcus was a tall man, broad shoulders, rough hands from years of work. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, people listened. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady. Sarah explained as Alex stood there, kicking at the dirt. When she finished, Marcus exhaled through his nose. "They suspended him for that?" Sarah nodded. "And Harris said they'd discuss further action tomorrow." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So we're punishing kids for knowing more than their teachers now?" Alex's chest loosened a little. At least his dad was on his side. "I'll handle it," Marcus muttered, but before he could walk inside, a deep voice rumbled from the porch. "No," the voice said. "I will." They all turned. Henry Carter, Alex's grandfather, stood in the doorway. His 6'3" frame cast a long shadow. his grey beard neatly trimmed, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp shirt. He looked like the kind of man who didn't waste words. Alex's stomach flipped. His grandfather didn't get involved in small matters. If he was stepping in, this wasn't small anymore. Henry cracked his knuckles, his gaze sharp. "They want to send my grandson home like he's some troublemaker," he said. "Fine, but tomorrow we're sending a message." And by the next morning, no one at Jefferson Middle School would forget the name Henry Carter. That night, Alex barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the moment in the principal's office, the way Mrs. Bennet looked at him like he was just some kid who didn't know anything, like his voice didn't matter. But the moment that stuck with him the most was his grandfather's reaction. Henry Carter wasn't a man who got worked up easily. He had been through too much, seen too much. A retired engineer, he had built his wealth through smart investments in land and technology, turning a small farm into a thriving business. People in town respected him. Some even feared him, not because he was intimidating, but because he was the kind of man who never let disrespect slide. So when he said they were sending a message, Alex knew something big was coming. By morning, the house was buzzing. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched toast as his mother paced, phone in hand. "I don't understand how this escalated," she muttered. "Why are they acting like he committed a crime?" Marcus sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable, because some people don't like being challenged. Henry sat at the head of the table, calm as ever, cutting into his eggs like he didn't have a single worry. Then, without looking up, he said, "Alex, put on a clean shirt. You're coming with me." Alex blinked. "Where?" His grandfather finally looked up, a slow smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "To school." Before Alex could ask why, he heard it. A deep, distant rumble, the kind that made the windows tremble. His father set down his mug. "Now, Dad." Henry pushed back his chair and stood. "I told you I'm handling it." Alex ran to the front door, throwing it open just in time to see it. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulling into the driveway. His breath caught as the vehicle came to a stop, kicking up a bit of dust. The engine idled, low and powerful. Alex turned to his grandfather, eyes wide. "We're taking that?" Henry stepped onto the porch, adjusting his cufflinks. "I told you, boy, we're sending a message." His mother shook her head, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Dad, is this really necessary?" Henry turned to her, his voice steady. "You want your son to learn to keep his mouth shut when he knows he's right?" She hesitated. Henry nodded. "Didn't think so." With that, Henry walked toward the SUV like it was just another morning, the driver already waiting with the door open. Alex didn't hesitate. He followed his grandfather, climbing inside. The moment he buckled in, the engine roared and they were off. His stomach flipped, but he barely noticed because today they weren't just showing up to school. They were making an entrance, and everyone was about to pay attention. At Jefferson Middle School, Principal Harris was already having a rough morning. He had barely sat down with his coffee when his secretary rushed in, her face pale. Sir," she stammered. "What is it, Mrs. Harper?" She hesitated before blurting out, "There's a black SUV with tinted windows parked right in front of the school." Harris blinked. "Excuse me?" But before she could repeat herself, a deep, rhythmic vibration filled the air. Books on. His shelf trembled. The windows rattled. Harris shot up from his chair and rushed to the window. What he saw made his breath hitch. Right in front of the school, the black SUV stood imposingly, and stepping out, moving like he owned the place, was Henry Carter. The engine idled, low and powerful, but the impact was already made. Students flooded the hallways, pressing against the windows, mouths hanging open. Some pulled out their phones, recording as the 6'3" figure of Henry Carter stepped onto the sidewalk, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Behind him, Alex followed, gripping his backpack, trying to process what was happening. From inside the building, teachers peeked through their blinds, whispering. Some students gasped, others laughed in disbelief. One kid muttered, "Yo, is that your grandpa?" Alex barely nodded. Security guards rushed toward the entrance, but Henry didn't even slow his stride. Principal Harris stormed outside, his face red, his tie slightly loosened, looking like a man already regretting his morning. "Mr. Carter, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded over the low rumble of the SUV's engine. Henry adjusted his sleeves, speaking with the same unshaken calm he always had. "The meaning?" he echoed. "The meaning is my grandson was kicked out of this school for knowing more than the person teaching him, and that doesn't sit right with me." Principal Harris ran a hand down his face, clearly thrown off. "Look, I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Henry chuckled. "Son, I don't get upset, I get answers." Alex watched, stunned, as his grandfather walked straight past Harris toward the main entrance of the school like he belonged there. The security guards looked at the principal for instruction, but Harris hesitated. There was something about Henry that made people second-guess themselves. Power, authority, a man who didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. "Mr. Carter," Harris called after him, jogging to catch up. "You can't just walk in here unannounced." Henry stopped just before the doors and turned, his gaze sharp. "Unannounced," he said. "Your school had no problem throwing my grandson out without a fair discussion, so consider this my way of announcing that I'd like one." Alex bit the inside of his cheek. His grandfather didn't yell. He didn't need to. Every word landed heavier because of it. Harris exhaled through his nose. "Fine, we can talk. But this spectacle," he gestured toward the SUV, "it's unnecessary." Henry smiled. "See, that's where we disagree." By now, the entire school was watching. From the second-floor windows to the cafeteria doors, students and staff peeked out, whispering, texting, recording. And just like that, the principal had no choice but to let them inside, because Henry Carter wasn't asking anymore. Inside, the main office felt tighter than usual. Alex sat next to his grandfather in front of Principal Harris's desk. Across from them, Mrs. Bennet stood near the filing cabinets, arms crossed. Henry leaned back in his chair, tapping the armrest with a single finger. "I want to hear it from her," he said, nodding toward Mrs. Bennet. "Tell me why you kicked my grandson out of class." Mrs. Bennet shifted, straightening her posture. "Mr. Carter, this isn't personal. Alex was disrupting the class. I asked him to follow instructions and he refused." Henry tilted his head. "So let me get this straight. A child corrects false information in your lesson, and instead of encouraging discussion, you punish her." Mrs. Bennet's jaw tightened. "It wasn't the time or place." Henry leaned forward slightly. "Then when is?" "Because I was under the impression that school was where kids learn." The room fell silent. Alex swallowed. He had never seen a teacher struggle for words before. Mrs. Bennet finally cleared her throat. Regardless, Alex's behavior was inappropriate. Henry stared at her for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. "Inappropriate." He tapped the desk. "Ma'am, I've been in boardrooms and courtrooms. I know what inappropriate looks like. A kid correcting a teacher. That, ain't it?" Principal Harris cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter, we can discuss this rationally." "Oh, I am rational," Henry interrupted. "That's why I came here first instead of taking this to the school board, the local news, or—" He glanced at Alex. "Social media." Harris flinched because he knew the moment this went public, it wouldn't just be about Alex anymore. And Henry Carter wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just a visit. This was a warning. The room felt like it had shrunk. Henry sat back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, completely at ease. Alex, on the other hand, sat stiffly, his hands curled into fists in his lap. Across from them, Mrs. Bennet looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Principal Harris adjusted his tie, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Alex could see it in their eyes. They had expected an angry parent, maybe even a yelling match. But what they got was worse. A man who knew exactly what he was doing. Henry clasped his hands together. Let's be real, folks. This ain't about classroom disruptions. This is about control. You didn't like that my grandson challenged you, so instead of handling it like an educator, you handled it like someone protecting their pride. Mrs. Bennet's nostrils flared. That's not... Henry held up a hand. Careful now. The weight in his voice shut her up instantly. Then, Henry turned to Harris. And you let it slide because it was easier. You didn't stop to ask yourself whether it was right. Principal Harris straightened. Mr. Carter, I understand your concerns. No, you don't, Henry interrupted, his voice still, a calm but sharper now. If you understood, you'd be apologizing right now. Instead, you're trying to save face. Harris opened his mouth, then shut it. Alex watched, stunned. His grandfather wasn't just talking, he was dismantling them piece by piece. Mrs. Bennet cleared her throat. With all due respect, I have a curriculum to follow. If every student stopped the lesson to challenge the material... Henry raised a brow. Did every student challenge the material? Mrs. Bennet hesitated. No. But did more than one? Mrs. Bennet clenched her jaw. No. So just my grandson, then? Mrs. Bennet swallowed. Yes. Henry spread his hands. Then sounds like this isn't a classroom problem. It's a you problem. Alex had never seen an adult speechless before. Mrs. Bennet's face burned. I didn't mean any harm. Henry leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Maybe not. But harm was done regardless. Silence. Principal Harris tapped his pen against his desk. Mr. Carter, I want to resolve this. What exactly are you asking for? Henry exhaled through his nose. First, Alex goes back to class today. No mark on his record. Harris nodded slowly. We can arrange that. Henry raised a second finger. Second, he gets a formal apology from you and Mrs. Bennet. Alex's breath hitched. An apology from a teacher. Mrs. Bennet's face twisted. That's unnecessary. Henry shrugged. Then I'll have to get in touch with the school board. I have friends there, you know. Might even make a few calls to some local reporters. You ever seen what happens when a school tries to silence a student who's just telling the truth? Harris stiffened. Mrs. Bennet's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Alex swore he could hear the gears turning in their heads. Henry was giving them a choice, but not really. Either they did the right thing now, quietly, or they did it later under public pressure. Mrs. Bennet looked at Harris, then at Henry, then reluctantly. She sighed. Fine. Henry turned to Harris expectantly. The principal adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Alex, we shouldn't have rushed to judgment. I apologize. Alex sat frozen. He didn't know if he was in shock or just waiting for someone to tell him he was dreaming. Then slowly, Mrs. Bennet exhaled, her hands clenched, like it was physically painful for her to do what she was about to do. Alex, she said through gritted teeth, I'm sorry. Alex didn't say anything, not because he couldn't, but because for the first time he didn't have to. Henry clapped his hands. Together. A good. Now that we've settled that, he stood towering over the desk, I'll be keeping an eye on this school. If anything like this happens again, I won't be coming alone. Harris's brows pulled together. Is that a threat? Henry grinned. Nah, it's a promise. Alex grabbed his backpack as his grandfather turned to him. Come on, kid, let's get you back to class. And just like that, the meeting was over. As Alex walked down the hallway, every pair of eyes was on him. Students whispered, some nodded in approval, others just stared. Alex wasn't sure if they saw him differently now, if they looked at him with respect or just shock. But honestly, he didn't care. because when he stepped into the classroom, Mrs. Bennet barely looked at him, and for the first time ever, Alex took his seat knowing. He had won. Alex slid into his seat, feeling a weight lift off his chest. The classroom was silent. Some students eyed him cautiously. Others grinned like they had just watched the greatest showdown in history. A few kids gave him a nod of respect, not the kind you get for being cool, but the kind that says, "I saw what you did." That took guts. Mrs. Bennet stood at the front, gripping her textbook a little tighter than usual. She didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge Alex's return, but Alex didn't need her to, because everyone in that room knew what had just happened. The lesson carried on, but something was different. Alex wasn't just another student anymore. He was proof. Proof that sometimes standing your ground meant shaking the whole damn system. Later that afternoon, the SUV pulled away once again. Alex stood outside with his grandfather, watching as the vehicle disappeared down the road. The school parking lot was still half full, but he knew that by tomorrow the whole town would be talking. Henry adjusted his sleeves, glancing at his grandson. "So what did you learn today?" Alex thought about it, about how he had been ready to fight with words, how he had thought the only way to be heard was to argue louder. But his grandfather had shown him something different. Power wasn't just about being right. It was about knowing when to make people listen. Alex smirked. That when people underestimate you, it's their mistake, not yours. Henry chuckled. Smart kid. They stood in silence for a moment, the sun dipping lower in the sky. Then Henry clapped him on the shoulder. "Next time, though, just tell me before you get yourself kicked out of school." Alex laughed. No promises. And as the SUV disappeared down the road, Alex realized something. This wasn't just about him. It was about every kid who had ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. Every kid who knew something the world didn't want to hear. And today, for all of them, he made sure they did. Never let anyone silence the truth, especially when you know it better than they do. Knowledge isn't just power, it's a weapon, and the smartest people, they know exactly when to use it. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you were right, but weren't taken seriously? Drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about it.